Hello, my name is Tim Kremer. I'm the Executive Director of the New York State School Boards Association. Welcome to Newsmakers, a segment of NYSSBA News. And today with me is the 54th Comptroller of the State of New York, Tom DiNapoli. Welcome, Tom.
Tim, great to be on your show.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm glad you're here.
Glad to be here.
We talked about a few things ahead of time that we want to go over, and I think these are things that are going to be really important for our members, the boards of education, the school administrators, school business officials who will be watching this. One of the things that you wrote about recently in one of your reports, and by the way, the reports that you guys put out are so clear, they're so easy to understand and read, they're timely, they from what I can tell, they're really, really well done, and I want to congratulate you and your staff on that.
Well, the staff gets the credit, and we are trying to make them as readable as possible, not only for policymakers like the members on your boards, but for the public too. We want the public to understand the context of the challenging times we continue to live in, especially for budgets. I don't have to tell you, your members, when they have to present their budget to the community and get a vote, this is a tough climate to win the confidence of taxpayers.
Well, whoever is helping you put those together, they understand there's an audience out there that is not going to be able to get into the weeds very deep, but they can get to that level of conclusions and recommendations that you bring forward very clearly. One of the things that you did in July is you talked about state budget gaps, and you were talking about the possibility that we could have some pretty big gaps, like as much as $5 billion a year over the next 3 years. And it looked as if I read that report, it was my understanding that you saw we had some spending increases. At the same time, we were doing some tax reductions, and we were, as New York has oftentimes done, using one-shots, some temporary funding stream for recurring expenses. Your reserves are low, you say, in the state, and we know that school aid is always linked to this sort of thing. So tell me, what's the impact of these budget gaps that are likely going to befell school districts going forward?
Well, I think the overall takeaway, and I appreciate the way you set up the question, because what we do try to point out is the long-term impact of budget decisions that are being made. You know, when the legislature is coming up with a budget agreement, it's in the context of the coming year. And one of the differences about how we look at these issues in the Comptroller's office is we say not only what's happening with the coming year, but what's happening 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, and encouraging long-term planning, which is certainly what we encourage at the local level with your school boards as well. And what we're saying is that when you add up some of the good things, record increase in school aid this year, $1.5 billion, and expected continued growth in that area, the spending commitments, and as you point out, impact on revenue, middle class income tax cut that's going to be phased in over a number of years, the expiration of the surcharge on higher income New Yorkers that's also going to be phased out in the near term. When you add all that together, we see the potential for gaps. Now, all of this is contingent upon where the economy is at. And another more short-term report that we put out that I'm sure you viewed showed that with the early results for the first quarter as to where our budget cycle is at, revenues in terms of personal income tax collections are down, lower than projections. So, what that will mean for the rest of the year, we don't know, but you see a general slowing of the economy. You see other indicators. Jobs continue to grow, but you take one important sector for New York, financial services, Wall Street. However you feel about Wall Street, they pay for a lot of the bills for the rest of us. About 18% of our revenues come from taxes derived from that part of our economy. We're seeing, because of the volatility in the markets, you're seeing some of those firms start to downsize. That will have an impact on revenue, particularly on the personal income tax side. So, the bottom line, Tim, is that we've certainly gone through some improved years, and I give credit to the governor and the legislature for that. More favorable consideration for school funding, the gap elimination adjustment, was repealed. That was a big victory, I think, for the school boards and for education.
We were very happy about that.
Push for that, and your members push for it. But I think I would add not an alarm, but a caution that the economy in some ways does seem to be slowing. Sales tax collections aren't growing as much. All these other factors that I mentioned. We may be in for a tighter budget picture as we move into next year. A lot remains to be seen. I think some of the uncertainty relates to global issues, China, the Brexit vote, the U.S. election still to be determined. So a lot of things that we don't control. But some word of caution, we may have to be perhaps a little more conservative in our assumptions as we move forward.
So we shouldn't think of 1.5 billion as our floor.
Well,
Because we oftentimes jump
no,
to,
and I'm
what
sure-
did we get last year? We want that plus.
Sure, and
Yeah.
I'm sure you will, and many will. And there's no doubt, look, public education dollars is a very important investment in terms of investing in our future, but also from the impact on property taxpayers. It's been a real struggle. Much of what's spent is raised locally. There's always been that argument as what's the appropriate share of state dollars. I guess now it's about 35-36% of what's spent comes from the state. So
about 60% from local.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different. When I was on the school board, I think the mix was a little more
Absolutely,
favorable.
yeah.
But that's ancient history, a long time ago, as you know. But that I think speaks to the struggle. And I know one of the concerns also has been again because of this unusual economy that we have, where cost of living is inflation is so low. That has an impact on the tax cap calculations.
Well, I want to talk about that. This whole idea of the tax levy growth.
Yeah.
You just came out with a report also in July, just last month, that said local governments, I'm talking now about the counties, the towns, the municipalities, the villages, their levy growth is going to be capped at 0.68 in 2017.
Yeah.
Is that an early indication of what we at schools might expect?
Well, for schools in the last cycle, it was below 1% also, even lower than that.
Yeah.
So I think that you are in an environment where that low inflation factor is going to continue to put even more of a struggle to stay within the tax cap.
You're not expecting it's going to be a lot higher.
I don't. Unless there's a dramatic change in the economic trends, I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't see that happening. But what's interesting, Tim, is that the overwhelming majority of school districts and local governments as well try to live within the cap. And it's harder for school districts because the local governments, if they have to override the cap to get a supermajority, if you're on a board of 5 people, it's a lot easier than going to the public, as most of your constituents have to do, to get that supermajority from the voters. And that's why most school districts choose not to take that route. And more often than not, when that route is chosen, it often doesn't produce a favorable outcome.
We did a little better this year.
A little better this year.
A little
So,
higher
yeah,
than,
yeah.
and maybe we've turned a corner, but I know that if I was on a school board, I know that if I stay at or below the cap, chances are really good we're passing this budget. If I go above it, I've lessened my chances.
Well, and I think in the context of this year, what you saw was a lot of concern because when we put out, what the growth factor was, it was very limited for schools. Some real concerns about the ability to still deliver education services. And I think that created the dynamic, and we put out our report on funding as well, in the budget process for the legislature and the governor to come up with that $1.5 billion increase. They were able to do it this year.
Yeah.
What's going to happen next
Yeah.
year? We don't know.
Yeah.
If they can't have another healthy increase, and we do have another low growth factor, you're going to feel a lot of pressure at the local level.
Well, but that's, of course, one of the reasons we used for the need for state to come in and save the day, because we were raising such little money at the local level. I was up at a school district where their tax levy growth factor was going to generate $19,000. Hey, you mentioned the cost of living, the inflation. We use the CPI as our index for the tax cap. I hear back and forth about whether or not that should be a reasonable index. Some people say, well, that's people's ability to pay.
Yeah.
Others say, well, that's not the market basket of goods that a school district's purchasing.
Yeah.
What's your read on this?
Well, I've heard that debate also. We haven't weighed in, one way or the other. There have been other issues raised about changing that or putting some more flexibility in the tax cap legislation. I think we went through a period of its implementation where I think it'd be fair to say there was not much openness to tweak it at all or change any of it. If the economy is slowing, if we're in a position where local governments, not just school districts, are feeling the pressure, and state aid in all these categories, not just school aid, flattens out or is less than it is, that may be the time to look at changing some of those definitions to provide a little more flexibility. The tax cap has a worthy goal, but it should not be a straitjacket to not enable local officials to deliver the services their constituents expect. People want quality schools.
Right.
They want quality local government services. When they're going to the school board meetings, they have an access that they don't get, they don't come to Albany as much. And that's why, it's important that you and your team are here and when you bring your members up to lobby. But at the local level, that's really grassroots. And so, what we've seen for many years is especially with the slowing down of aid during some of the cuts that we faced, real pressure at the local level to make the tough choices. And I think the schools have responded very admirably to that. But if we start to go into a phase where we have less opportunity to have the kind of state support we've seen this year, more pressure at the local level, how's that all going to add up? And I think that's the kind of question we all should be concerned about.
Well, like you talk about, having a long-term financial plan, we're really starting to impart upon our members. I know it's hard to see beyond next year and beyond that, but you have to start thinking about there are services and programs you're going to have to provide, technologies you're going to have to purchase, upgrades you're going to have to invest in, and that's going to take resources. And you can't just continue to spend down reserves or think about the short term. We've got to figure out how are we going to be prepared to provide a high quality, properly financed program 2, 3, 4 years from now. That's a tough question a lot of school boards are dealing with.
And also identify the gaps that are there. To start to early identify how you might be able to deal with some of those gaps. It's also key to inform the public, especially for our school districts where you have to go back for that vote, where the school elections are very grassroots. I always try to say to local officials, what we do in the Comptroller's office is not just about empowering the local officials with information, do their jobs in an effective way, but it's to give information to the community so that when the voters and the taxpayers are weighing in at the local level, be it at a school board meeting or a budget vote, that they understand what's going on. And so that's why having that long-term plan, sharing it with the community, engaging the community in the process of making decisions, even if there are tough choices, that's how you get, I think, a better outcome.
So when you got elected to the school board when you were 18 years old, the first 18-year-old school board member ever in New York, I don't know what the split was between state aid and local funding at that time. As long as I've been around, probably as long as you've been around, people say, we shouldn't have property tax law. It's no way to fund schools. The state should pay for it all. And now you start to think, okay, that's income tax, sales tax. There's probably some other forms of revenue there. But is that a good idea?
It's a perennial question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think when I was on the board, I think it was over 40% the state share, but it is ancient history now, so I don't remember the exact number. I think one of the challenges continues to be that the property tax, when all this financing was first set up, it wasn't education wasn't the cost that it is today. And to put that much of an expense on the property tax is onerous in many parts of the state.
Yep.
As you know, I live on Long Island.
Yep.
And in the school district I live in, the percentage of state aid is way below that, 35, 36% statewide average. I haven't seen the latest figures for my particular district, but I'm sure it's single digit. That's what it's been for a period of
7,
time.
8.
Yeah.
Like
So it's basically the property taxes paying for everything. That's a big tax. So I think it would be smart to have a broader-based tax. The state with our own problems, can we pick up 20, 25 billion, tomorrow to pick? It's not going to happen.
Well,
that's not going to happen. But I do think that the real issue, that becomes of concern, because if you could assure the public that if we raise some of these other broad-based taxes, that in fact property tax will be reduced significantly, or, I don't know if you can ever eliminate it, but reduce it significantly, they might be willing to buy that bargain. Here's the real challenge when you talk about schools, though. Under the current structure, the one thing that you certainly retain is local control, local decision making.
Yes.
And the reality is, if you, let's take the elimination approach. Let's say you're going to have the state, pay for it all, however that's done, income tax, sales tax combination, or some new tax. Who's going to make the decision about who gets what in terms of money?
Yep.
And that's the question. Does the state legislature decide district by district? Do you let the county decide then which districts get what? And I think that's really the big issue you first have to get to. Who's going to decide the distribution? Right now, you know what you're getting from the state, you know what you may be getting from Washington, limited as that may be. At the end of the day, you locally can make decisions because you control that property tax levy, even with the cap, and then you can make choices about priorities. Whoever is deciding how much to pay is going to then get control, which is not just tax policy, it's education policy.
Well,
and I think until we grapple with that question of who would decide distribution, you're not going to see a movement to away from the property tax structure we have now.
To me, it sounds like it would even more politicize it. And because it
could.
does take it out of those. Right now, there's a lot of frustration around the cap, but the idea of the state taking over the whole thing, which is, I don't think is ever going to happen, but if it ever did,
But you know,
I don't think it necessarily improves the possibilities.
Yeah, there have been proposals to have the state be committed to taking up more of it. Not
Like a
just from
50% or something
Yeah,
like
not
that.
just from an equity funding issue, which is another question right
Yep.
now under the current
Right.
process. Districts that can't pay but have great needs often don't get adequate resources. So that's one piece. But if there was a more generous, basic level of aid, and then allow an option, for an enhancement with a property tax, that structure, which was proposed many years ago. Actually,
Right.
my assembly member Angelo Orazio had one of the original proposals in the area. Maybe that's something worth dusting off and looking at again.
Let's talk a little bit about fiscal stress. For 3 years now, you've put out a report regarding school district fiscal stress where you identify districts as being at a level of stress by significant, moderate, susceptible, or no designation. And some of the stress is not chronic. People come and go off
Yep.
this list. But I did note, and you noted in your report, there are 32 districts that have been on this list all 3 years. And so you start asking, well, what's going on here? And you point out there's low fund balances, there's operating deficits, they have limited cash, they have a shrinking tax base, they don't get a lot of support from their community financially. Are there things that we can do about this to get those districts off that stress list?
I'd like to think so. I mean, the purpose of the fiscal stress monitoring system is really to be an early warning system, because we don't want to have, and it's not just school districts, as you know, it's all municipalities in the state that we measure. We don't want to have, in the case of municipalities, a bankruptcy like happened in Detroit and some of the cities in California. So it's really meant to be an early warning, using objective criteria to evaluate. And now that we've had a number of years, to assess where districts are at, it's hopefully going to be used locally as a tool to help districts come out of those stress categories. Those districts that seem to be stuck in them, we certainly are available with the work that we do. We could elevate our involvement in terms of doing risk assessments, budget reviews, audits if that's appropriate, giving guidance on issues like sharing services as a way to cost.
Do these districts reach out to you
Some
for
do,
that?
some do. Some feel, oh, you're pointing a finger. And again, we're not trying to point a finger. We're trying to say, if you got a problem, let us all be part of helping you with a solution. And let's make sure your community knows about this as well. Again, an informed citizenry, informed taxpayers. And we have had some districts that have reached out to us. And it really gets to, what's been a theme in much of our discussion, Tim, long-term planning. Even if you're in a tough situation, you have to start to put the basics down as to what is your long-term financial and budget plan, so that when the challenges become apparent, you can earlier on identify what they are and then try to come up with solutions. So I would say to any district that still is on that list, if you haven't reached out to the Comptroller's office, we have a great team of people in our local government division, in our budget division, our legal division, who are there to help and provide assistance. The good news is, close to 80% of school districts are not in any level of stress.
That's right.
So it really is a very small number. And of the ones in stress, very few are in that highest level of stress. So, I think that's actually more good news than bad. But for those that are in a tough situation, don't be shy about reaching out for help.
Well, you also identified that a lot of these districts that find themselves on this list, the bad end of it, high need districts to begin with.
Yeah.
Many of them may not be getting their fair share of state aid.
Yeah.
Many of them have had big numbers of gap elimination adjustment taken out of their state aid allocations. Some of that's moving away. The GEA is gone.
Yeah.
Perhaps there'll be some adjustments on state aid that will help lessen the blow, but it's not all just about more money. There's probably the way in which you manage the money that you've got is probably part of the scene here.
And the other challenge and why we continue to do this, and why we emphasize training, and we're happy to collaborate with you and the School Board Association as part of our training effort, is that, people change, boards change, administrators change.
Yep.
Some good decisions may be replaced by some bad decisions, if there's a turnover. So we really always have to be vigilant. And certainly for our school board trustees, it's important they be involved with your association, work with your staff. When I was on the school board, I loved coming to the conventions and being part of the legislative network and going, and I was even asked, I think I was only on board 2 or 3 years, and I was one of the trainers at one of the training sessions.
Is that
You know,
right?
they thought I had enough knowledge to, offer. What
Oh, you're the one.
Even though I was 20, 21, or whatever I was then. So, yeah, I was the one that put it right. So take advantage of those opportunities. So with the School Board Association, with the Comptroller's Office, there are resources available, especially for your newer school board members.
Yeah.
You know, it's tough when you're starting out. You're there with good intent, and all of a sudden you say, wait a minute, what did I get into?
Oh, yeah.
Reach out to the School Board Association, reach out to the Comptroller's Office. We're there to help you be a good school board
Boy, I'll
member.
tell you what, you just made the commercial for this show. The last thing I want to talk about is school audits. You know, both of us were out at the 5-point plan. And we had this emergency take place, and we had to deal with it. And I think, honestly, I was amazed at how well things turned out. When we started talking about mandatory training for school board members on fiscal oversight, boy, I was thinking, the sky was going to fall down. And year number 1, we got a lot of pushback. Year number 2, everybody was fine. And now it's just part of the landscape and always will be. And in fact, mandatory training's even grown some. Well, I think I've seen some of that with the audits too. When your office began doing school district audits, everybody was really jumpy. And I know not everybody's embracing all of these audits, and particularly when you're saying something that's critical, but at the same time, it seems as if there's much more of a constructive relationship, much more willingness to work with you. The reason I say that is because I see the responses from the school districts to the audits that you issue every Saturday morning. I read them, or some of them, and they're actually somewhat appreciative many times in saying, I really appreciate the demeanor of your staff, the advice we got, and this is fair. Tell me about the
every
audit.
now and then you see a positive headline too. Sometimes the press will, people sometimes say, we only see negative. Well, we don't write the headlines or the articles, but I've been seeing articles across the state where when we say something positive, we're seeing those headlines now as well. The audits are meant to be of help. It's meant to be a teachable moment, meant to be constructive. Sure, when an audit is done and it's making recommendations for change, sometimes it is critical of certain aspects of operations, but it's all meant to help improve those operations. It's not meant to be, we got you look at the context, you remember. We had a situation as part of my assembly district in Roslyn, millions of dollars stolen by the administration, and let me tell you, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere. And that's why I was actually the legislative sponsor when I was still in the assembly of the bill to require these changes. Then lo and behold, I came to the Comptroller shortly thereafter. And the reality is billions of dollars are being managed by our school boards across the state. Public education is a big business. So it is appropriate that we provide that other level of oversight. As you know, Tim, in the original legislation, we were required to audit every school district BOCES and charter school within a 5-year period. Some back and forth on charter schools, but we'll save that for another show. But we're back doing that along with the city controller.
Thank you.
And I said to our staff, although there's not a mandate for us to do that anymore, we still need to do that. So we're going to have, it's probably more than 5 years, but not too much more, another round of auditing every school district BOCES and charter schools that we have ability to do that. So I think by April of next year, the latest, the current plan, we will have gone through a second cycle for all the school districts. And we'll do it again because it's meant to help the school operations be as good as they could be. And I think if it's accepted in that spirit, even if there is something that's viewed as critical or recommendation for change, it's not meant for anything other than to make your district operations be the best that it
Have
can
you
be.
seen 2 or 3 things that keep popping up that you have to keep reminding school boards and maybe being critical of them?
Well, I mean, some of it gets back to what we talked about, lack of a long-term plan. Some of that then gets tied into either a poor estimate, whether it's under or over, of what the expenses will be and what the revenue needs will be as well. So it's a need for more precision in terms of the budget process. And what we've seen now, and I know some of our friends on the school boards aren't happy when we do this, but when you have an unrestricted fund balance that's beyond the statutory limit, we often, we're trying to be prudent, we're trying to save for when the legislature wants. Well, we have to audit based on what the statute says. If you want to change the statute, if you want that percentage to be higher, and maybe that is on your agenda, I'm not sure, but you got to get that. In the meantime, if that's what it is, that's what we have to audit against. And so when you see a situation where where money's put into the budget and it's just not spent, and then the reality is then the unrestricted balance is way beyond the 4%. At the same time, sometimes the taxes are being raised. It does raise the question then about what exactly is going on with those finances. Another area, Tim, is the reserves. Have you set up the reserve in the appropriate way? Have you done what you need to do locally to follow the law? And then again, in terms of how you're funding that reserve, are you funding it appropriately? We did a report a few years ago on the EBALR reserves, and we found in too many districts way overfunding of those. And once you put the money in there, often in some of those reserves, it's very difficult to get it out. So that's been another area where we continue to see some issues and some problems.
I think the difference that, the people that I represent have complained to me a little bit. Yeah, it's really, we all have 20/20 hindsight. And an auditor comes in and they're looking backward. And they're looking at what you shoulda, coulda, woulda done when we're doing it in the heat of the moment and we're under a tax cap and things are in flux and we're negotiating a contract and our healthcare costs are going up and et cetera, et cetera. We're trying to manage as best we can, and there are times when things get a little out of whack. We do know an auditor comes in, and not saying that they're inaccurate in their assessment, but they do sometimes feel as if they're being kind of treated as if they've done something nefarious when they're saying, well, this is more of an art than a science, sir. And I guess I'll speak for them to say they're doing what they can. Yeah. There are people who maybe are being nefarious. I get that, but I think that is
no, and we don't
small group.
Oh, absolutely, and we don't ascribe intent, and I think those comments are fair. I think those are fair, but of course, an audit is always going to come in and look backwards.
That's right.
It can't look forward, and if an audit would encourage more precision in terms of budget estimates, understanding that it's never going to be a precise science.
Right.
Particularly in those cases where you end up with a much larger fund balance than you had presented to the public. You're putting money in the budget you're not going to spend, and at the same time you're raising taxes. Something, maybe it is time for you to maybe retool how you're doing that. If you do think that there should be an ability for a higher percentage that you could keep an unrestricted budget, that work with the school association to change that. And keep in mind, as I said, when we find some good things, the Franklin School District, for instance, had a really effective way to save some money on the healthcare side. We celebrated that. So we're not just looking to nitpick, and the auditors aren't there just to find what's negative. When we find something positive, we try to elevate that as well.
Oh, you do, and that is noteworthy. I know that I keep track of those kinds of things, and when I see some really clean audit and some laudatory comments from your office, I make sure I congratulate those people about that. Talking about this budgeting and talking about the training and the tools that are made available through your office, is there some sort of a guide that would help me make those calculations as far as reserve amounts, as far as both unanticipated expenses? I'm looking for something that I can rely on that could keep me on track rather than doing this in this kind of guessing game. Yeah. Maybe you have some tools like that.
Yeah, no, we do have, through, our website is always the place to go, right, these days. We do have
calculators and
that can help with that. And the other piece, if the precise question you have related to that you don't find in on the website or in our publications, we have regional offices all across the state. So wherever your school board is located,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. No, we're I'm going to forget some. Hauppauge, Binghamton, Buffalo, obviously Albany, Glens Falls, Syracuse, Rochester, Newburgh. So you can get to know the folks who it's not auditors and the head of the audit team, and they would be happy to be helpful. Gabe Deo heads our division of local governments and school district accountability right here in Albany. We would encourage people to reach out, especially if you got an audit, maybe you didn't like everything. Well, come say, well, all right, so how can we turn this around so next time we won't have some of these issues? I've said, and I say it because I served for 10 years on the school board, and I said to the staff, we have the accountability responsibility with the auditors. We're not going to shy away from that, but we also have to understand the importance of being partners. The best outcome would be if our school boards and school districts all got clean audits.
Yep.
That would mean that taxpayers have nothing to be concerned about. So if we could be partners on another track while we're still on a parallel track doing the accountability work, That to me is exactly what we're trying to achieve in the Comptroller's office. So I don't want your members to just say, oh, the Comptroller, they're only there to get us. We only, better not we not hear from them. Reach out to us.
Yeah.
Our folks more than ever have been willing to be helpful and to be supportive where they can be, understanding that we still have our own job to do as far as the audit side.
Well, one of the things I've appreciated in some of the audits you've done, not necessarily of school district, but perhaps of school districts, but you've noted that there are some vendors out there who are overcharging.
Yeah.
And maybe doing some things illegally.
Yeah.
And bringing that to and maybe even handing it off to law enforcement, saving taxpayers' dollars. All of a sudden, we might be actually doing business with some of these vendors only to find out, whoa,
Yeah.
what are we doing here?
Yeah.
Anything there that we should be paying attention to?
Look, you put your finger right out. It's one reason why I should read my Saturday morning emails. Tell you if they want to get on that list, we can get it to them. But if you're not on the email list, we do post all of our audits. So you definitely should take a look, because there may be a vendor in an area that you're going to see pop up and say, well, wait a minute, we've been doing business, but maybe we shouldn't.
Yeah.
The other piece I would mention is we post financial data, budget data on our Open Book New York website. Another opportunity.
Open Book New York. That all one word?
Yeah,
okay.
and that's also part of the Comptroller's website.
Okay.
So if you want to take a look at, let's say, what kind of spending is going on in the school districts around you as well for comparison, that information is there. So it's state spending and local government spending. And again, if there's a question on a vendor, we maintain a database, for state agencies in terms of vendor responsibility. You can be in touch with us as well on that.
Do you have people who kind of serve in an advisory capacity, people like school board members or others who you maybe sit down with in a kind of focus group once in a while and say, how are we doing and to what extent can we improve our services?
I'd like to think I'm pretty accessible, so I go to a lot of events regionally, some of your regional associations,
yes.
And I try to come to the statewide
Here you are
stuff.
right now.
No, I'd like to do more. And certainly, having been around for a while, I don't have a formal advisory committee per se, but we're open to suggestions.
Okay.
Everybody's open to be an advisor to me, and I'm happy to get that kind of input. So certainly, again, to your members, if they want to invite me to their, to their county or their regional school board association meeting, if we could make that work schedule-wise, I'd be happy to do that.
Last thing I want to mention before we run out of time here is the fact that you are the sole trustee of a huge pension fund. How many billions of dollars?
Well, it's been up and down a little bit this year, but we're at 178 billion at the end of the fiscal year.
Wow!
So,
Wow.
The third largest in the country.
And how many retirees, beneficiaries, members do you have in there?
Well, altogether, it's well over 1 million. Probably now we have about 340,000 retirees, and the balance are our active employees. And what people notice, many of them are school district employees. They're the non-teaching personnel are in the system I'm the trustee for. And then again, your members may not be aware, I have a seat on the teachers' retirement system for the state. So the rest of your members, if they're not in our system, their employees are in the teachers' system. So we do have input into the decisions made by TRS as well.
There's a couple school board members,
yes,
one
exactly.
current, one former, who are over there as well.
Yeah, they do a good job there. We understand the pressure of rates after they went up after the global financial crisis. We had to do that because our pension funds, as opposed to what we see in other states that are ruining the finances, we're in good shape. We're well funded. This year was tough. We didn't make as much as we had wanted. We made money, but basically the returns were very, very modest. We've cut the rates, contribution rates, for 3 years in a row. We're in the process of making the decisions on that. I don't know that we're going to be able to cut them again, but I'm hoping at a minimum they'll be basically stable because we want to relieve that pressure. And as we're taping this, the markets have come back, from what they were a few months ago. We'll see. There's a lot of volatility right now out there in the investment climate. You don't make money on fixed income. We are limited on putting money in the alternatives, like real estate and private equity. So you end up having to have a lot of your money in the blue chip stocks that we're all familiar with. And when they're not doing well, we all get hurt by it. But we are striving to certainly not have an increase in the contribution rate if we can.
We noted in the teachers' retirement system, we've kind of done this horseshoe thing. We started off over here 5 years ago, went way up, and now we're back down to about where we were 5 years ago. And it's still not an inexpensive program to fund. It's a defined benefit pension program, and yet it's becoming more reasonable to fund, and we certainly feel that, I know school districts recognize that this is a big part of their budget. When those rates go down, the employer contribution
Makes a
rates
big
go down,
difference.
makes a big difference.
You know, keep in mind though, some people have the context of when they were paying almost nothing for the pension. And
That's
that was
right.
that was Disneyland.
That
you know?
was.
That wasn't reality.
We made mistakes by doing that.
And there's no question about it,
Yeah.
because the returns were such and the mix of retirement, you could, to assume that that was always going to be the case was absolutely wrong. And by statute now, it could never go down to 1% or 0, which is good. But we're all striving with the teacher's retirement system, with the employee's retirement system. We understand the pressure. We're doing the best we can to try to bring those rates down even lower. It's just tougher right now than it's been even a year or two ago.
Well, Comptroller Tom DiNapoli, this has been great. You've
Former
been-
school board trustee. Tom
Former
DiNapoli.
school board-
Better title.
Yeah, okay.
Mineola,
Yeah,
Mineola Schools.
That's right.
Proud
That-
graduate. And I was a senior in school when I was elected. How's that to be elected to the school board? I was still in high school. I got my high school diploma, and a week later they swore me in on July 1st.
Since you did that, there's probably been a few more of that, but
yeah,
that
there've
is a
been few.
rare
Yeah,
occasion.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I always say I'm the Jackie Robinson. I was the first.
Well, it's been great to have you
Thanks,
here, and you've always been very accessible to us. Great information. You're one of the good guys, and we're really proud to be associated with you and to have you here with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been our opportunity to have the Comptroller of the State of New York here with us, Tom DiNapoli, and I hope you've enjoyed this show. You'll find it online at any time at www.nysba.org, and we're also on the YouTube channel. Thank you very much.